Hi, everybody. We're going to be doing an express entry overview and strategy part 1. So hi, how are you? It's Brandon. Okay, so we're going to get started here. I'm going to be on for about 45 minutes and then we're going to do some questions. But today I'm going to be talking about express entry. I'm going to give you a bit of an overview and strategy. What you'll notice there, it says part 1. Express entry is actually a very, very big topic. And what I want to do is I want to cover it in detail and I want to break it down in a number of components. So this first portion is going to be all about just an overview so that you can understand some of the basics, and then I'm going to give a few little strategy tips in there because I think that the strategy is important and it's actually how you unpack what you're looking at and what to do with it. So that's where I think I can provide a bit more value in that, and that's what I want to do today. So let's do this. So the overview for today, I'm going to talk about the importance of planning. If you've watched any of my material before, always talking about planning, because one of the things that I see for people that come to me are people that are successful are the people that plan ahead. So I always like to talk about that, and I always like to hit that as a point that I just want to continue to hit. So I'm going to talk about an overview of express entry, and then I'm going to talk about how you're scored and how to qualify. And then we're going to dive into, a lot of the questions that I get generally are around strategies to increase points and things along those lines. And then we're going to do final thoughts and some questions and answers. Okay. So I've, in my true fashion, I think I've prepared more material than I have for the time. So I'm going to try to go slowly enough that people can understand it. But at the same time, I want to keep going because I have a lot that I want to tell you. And this is being recorded, so you can go back and review it later. The other thing I'd like to point out is that if you have any questions, I'd love to take those. So you can just put those up, and I'll just put a little thing in there so you can just type those into the chat. So obviously, if this is recorded, I'm not going to be able to do that a little bit later and answer them, but I can try if they're in the chat. But if you're online right now, by all means, if you have questions while I'm going through, just put them in and I'll do my best to answer them. The only thing that I ask for is just in respect to everybody else who's watching, if you can keep those questions general in nature. I don't like to get into specific examples and specific cases, but I will answer general questions. Okay. So let's dive in here. So the importance for planning. If you've watched, again, other slides or other presentations that I've done, I use this exact slide all the time. And the reason is because I believe that for you to be successful, you need a roadmap for your journey. And any journey that you're going to take, whether it be going to school or becoming a doctor is something that I always like to use. You're going to have to go to elementary school, you go to high school, you go to university, then you go to med school, then you go to residency, and then you actually can become a doctor, right? So it's the same thing with immigration. You have to plan from the beginning. You have to figure out which programs are the best for you, and then you have to see how you can best qualify. You're going to have to be looking at real-time data, how the programs are actually running at the time, and then you're going to have to be able to have some backups in case things don't work out by the time you get to that stage in your plan. So what I really try to impress upon people is have the plan out here so you know where you are. I guess you can't see my hands, but out here. And then you want to work back and know exactly how you want to get to where you're going. Okay. And the other thing as well that I always like to say is that everybody's different. A lot of times what I hear from people is, oh, my friend did this, or my friend told me this, or I read this on the internet. It's like, I don't want to hear it. And the reason is because everybody's different. Everybody's unique. Everybody's different. That's what we try to impress upon there. So anyways, let's keep moving there. So an overview of express entry. Right from the beginning, what I like to tell people is that express entry is a system, right? You'll see that there. It's a system. It is not a program. So, and I'm going to get into a bit of the history and the reason why, but this is a system where you can apply for a federal skilled worker program, the federal skilled trades program, the Canadian experience class, or the provincial nominee programs. Okay, some of the different streams. Okay, so important. This is a management system that was introduced to control application flow. And I'm going to talk about the history of why that's important, because it'll allow you to understand kind of why things happen in express entry the way that they do. There's 4 programs, and I'll just touch briefly on those. A federal skilled worker is for somebody who's working in a skilled job, who has 1 year of skilled work experience within the last 10. Okay, and there's obviously another scoring criteria, but that will be a presentation for another day when I do federal skilled workers. Federal skilled trades. So if you're a carpenter, a plumber, an electrician, any type of trade occupation, you have the ability to apply under the federal skilled trades class. So that's actually what that is adapted to. And what's important there is they're looking more at the skill, and they've made some tweaks to it. For instance, with the language ability is one of the things that sets that apart. The Canadian experience class is aimed at people who are in Canada or have been in Canada and who've worked 1 year of qualifying skilled work experience within the last 3. Okay, so that's the Canadian experience class. So if you've never been to Canada and you've never worked here, you might as well take that program off the table. And the last one is the provincial nominee programs. Now, there's a number of different streams, and we have provinces in Canada. So we have 10 provinces and 3 territories, but there's different streams because immigration is a shared responsibility between the federal and the provincial governments. So what happens is it allows the provinces to select who they want to come. So what are the needs for their province, whether they be economic needs, whether they be like, we want to bring in master's students or we want to bring in entrepreneurs. They can set those quotas as they see fit. And that is actually a way for people to get through. Now, I always refer to the provincial nominee programs as the golden ticket, so to speak. And the reason that I say that is because, you get an automatic 600 points. So 600 points with the other points that you'll get, that pretty much solidifies your opportunity to come to Canada. Just briefly there, I touched on the history of express entry, and I wanted to, I don't want to get into all of the different reasons, but I want you to understand a few things about express entry and why this change was monumental and important. So, economic programs have been a driving force in Canadian immigration. And what that means is that for many, many years, a good chunk of people that are coming into Canada are coming into the economic categories. So those programs that I was just talking about, those are economic categories. So we have different categories in immigration. We have economic categories, we have family categories, we have the refugee categories, for instance. And the economic categories, they'll break down into different programs. So why this is important is that depending on the government we have, that's in power, they set different priorities for immigration. So many years back, for instance, when there was issues in Syria, we brought in 50,000 Syrians, and that was in the news right when the prime minister was elected. So there was a priority put on that section of immigration. So traditionally, however, if you look past all the years, you'll see that actually is more channeled into the economic side. So that's been a real driving force. Now, with that said, previously there was a program, there still is a program, but the way it was administered is that you could fill out an application and you could apply, and then you would get in line, and then it was kind of a first come, first serve. And I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. But this created huge backlogs, like massive backlogs. And what happens is that when there's massive backlogs, there's lots of people that are waiting for years and years and years. And when people wait a long time, we don't like to wait. So what had happened is a lot of people were getting very agitated. The government was in a bit of a pickle because they had all of these people that were waiting, and et cetera, et cetera. So Previously, the immigration minister at the time, he basically came in and said, we're just going to cancel all the applications and we're going to hand them back and we're going to go to the express entry system. Very controversial at the time. Looking back on it, it probably needed to be done because the backlog wouldn't have cleared itself, and it would have been kept going, and it would have kept growing. However, one of the issues that a lot of people had, and especially me, is that, in this country, when we tell people, we say, listen, wait in line, your turn will come, et cetera, et cetera. At the time, it wasn't a lot of people were disappointed, and it wasn't exactly probably a good move, but in the long run, it was a good move. I don't know if that actually makes sense, but hopefully. So why is this important? Now, it solved two major problems. So I've already talked about the backlog, because what you'll see, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit, is they can only select they select the people as they want, right? So if they have capacity to be able to process those applications, they're going to select a certain number of people. They're going to bring them in. They're going to process them. Then they'll select another group. They'll bring them in. They'll process. Okay. That's the first thing. So now the backlog issue is gone. The second issue is that we've also removed all the litigation issues. So what that means is that if you want, you can actually, in Canada, you can actually, have the government judicially reviewed, where you can go to court and you can file an application in federal court for if there's been an error in law or an error in fact, or mandamus, for instance, which is another example, which is basically telling the department that they need to act on something. So there's a number of ways that you can go. Now, if you're applying under express entry, you're not actually given a file number. So even if you wanted to go and there was some way that you could go to court and you could sue the government or do something along those lines, you actually can't, because you actually don't have an application. So if you don't have an application, you have no case. So express entry solves this for the government. It allows them to control the backlog, and it also allows them to control any litigation issues that may or may not come out of that, because you don't actually have an application. So it's not something that can be reviewed in a court. Okay, so let's move on. That's a bit of a brief history, and I just want to dive into this. So these diagrams have come off the IRCC website many years back, and I like them. I still like to use them just to show, it's graphically it's great. So as I touched on, there was the old system where you would just kind of move through the system, and just go through, doom, 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 doom. Hey, welcome to Canada, right? So it was a first come, first serve system, all right? I think that picture tells it all. Little green guy moving through. Okay, now with express entry, what happened is you would create a profile, okay? And then when you create the profile, you would go into this express entry pool. Let me just make this a little bit bigger for you. Okay, so what would happen is that you would go through, you put your application in, and then you get entered into Job Bank. You would go into this pool, and I'm going to show you what the pool looks like, and I'm going to extrapolate out of that how you can interpret it, okay? Because I have some predictions for you, which I'm going to get to in probably about 10 minutes or so. So you're in this pool, and then what happens is based on your scoring, they're going to choose who they want to come. Okay, so we're going to get into that in a little bit too. Okay, lots of things to get into. Okay, so everybody goes in, they can go into the pool. Now, this is an older thing about the job bank. I would suggest, applying for jobs through the job bank is probably not the best strategy to finding employment here. I know that when I have to do LMIAs and we have to use the job bank for promotion and whatnot, we get a lot of people that are applying for jobs. And, quite frankly, a lot of people, when employers are doing that, they'll either be starting this because they have other people in mind, or they're looking for specific criteria. And the reason that I say that, not to be controversial or anything, but a lot of people will, like, for instance, if I'm doing a caregiver application, I've got electrical engineers from Pakistan that are emailing me all the time, for instance, or a business guy from the Middle East somewhere, India, like you're applying for jobs that, no, like you don't have any caregiving experience. So be selective with what you're looking for, and also know that the job bank may not be the best place for you to find employment, because they might actually be looking for people domestically, or they might be doing it as part of an immigration process for an identified foreign worker that they have, because they're trying to prove the Canadian job market. But I just want to throw that in there, because that's one thing that I find, a lot of people are looking at. Okay, so scoring and qualification overview. Now, before I do that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pop up here. I'm going to talk about the rounds really quickly. So here's the web page. This is the web page, the government web page here. And yesterday we had a draw. Now, what I'm about to tell you here, I want you just to be aware that this is being filmed during the COVID times. The reason that I want you to understand that is because I'm going to speak about trends up until about March 2020, first week of March, because that was the last draw. But I'm also, just to give you a bit of an overview of this, I also want you to to understand what that looks like in terms of currently and the current situation as well. So basically what happens is they do draws. Now, traditionally, we did draws every 2 weeks, usually on a Wednesday, sometimes on a Monday, and they would be comprehensive draws. Now, they would choose from federal skilled workers, federal skilled trades, federal Canadian experience class, and P&P. So those are comprehensive draws, which means no program is specified. Currently, as of COVID, we're going back and forth between Canadian experience class, right? And we're going back and forth between that and provincial nominees, which makes sense to me, because I believe that the government is trying to clear out a lot of the people that are here in Canada right now, because remember, they're trying to, they have the ability to select and bring the people in. So I think that that's actually a pretty good strategy right now, especially for people that are in Canada, and it's going to clear out a lot of the Canadian experience class. However, for people that are overseas, I do see an opportunity that's going to create as well, and I'm going to speak about that in a few minutes here. So just as a basis, we have the Canadian experience class here. That was the draws, but you can see if you go here, let me do that. So if you click on this, you can see all of the previous draws here. So there's the provincial nominee draw, there's a CEC, but I'm actually going to go all the way back to, if I can do it, April. Let's go back a little bit further. Okay. See here, this says no program specified. And then you'll see the score is 471, and they invited 3,900 people. Okay, here they did 4,500. Okay, that was the last one where it was specified. 3,500, 34, and it's sitting in the 472, 471. So why is this important? So prior to COVID, what was happening is we were having draws every 2 weeks, usually on the Wednesday. And then what was happening is they were doing comprehensive draws, which means out of all of the programs, and it was the highest score that was being drawn out across all of the programs. That score was generally sitting in the 470s, is where that was sitting. So what's happened is that now they're doing the draws and it's pushing the scores down, but they're only drawing out of different categories. So let's look at comprehensive draws. 470 was generally the score every 2 weeks, and they're pulling on average about 3,500 people. So if they're pulling 3,500 people and they're doing that every 2 weeks, you're looking at about 7,000 people a month, right? So what does that mean? What that means is, and then I'm going to go back here because what I want to show you is what's really important in the current system. Okay. So you can see as of May 12th, right? As of May 12th, you can see that in the system, there was 146,402 people. Okay. And you can see the point distributions here. Now, the score on the last draw, which was 447. So 447. So yesterday / today, right? Because we've got the Get the date up there, but then it's here. So again, we're on Friday, right? So we're outside of that norm of the Wednesday, but it's at 4:47. So what's important to understand, remember, this system is based on 4 programs. They only pulled those people out of the 447, came from only people that are out of Canadian experience class. So what you can see is that we have, say, for instance, 1,017 people here. We have another 3,100 people here. And we have all of these people that are above that score, okay? Because 447 falls in here. So what you're looking at is basically all of these people here. There's a big, I'm going to guess probably a big bubble in there for federal skilled worker. So when they start going back to the comprehensive draws, you're going to see the score go up, but I don't think as high as the 470s. I think it's going to go up and then it's going to come back down, because what's going to happen is, and there's going to be a window in there. And you got to think about this broadly, about all of the different things that are going on. In my opinion, the world's shut down, as we know. So you're going to have all of those people that don't have their educational credential assessments. They don't have their English test done, for instance. So that really stops them from being able to apply. Now, if you have that, or if you're in a place where that stuff is opening up, then that's actually to your benefit, because what that means is that you're able to get in ahead, and you're probably going to ride that wave. If they start pulling people in comprehensive draws, the number is going to go up from the 440s, but it's going to be lower than those 470s at the numbers if they're drawing like 3,500, 3,500, 3,500. Because for somebody to be able to get the English test, for instance, they're going to have to book, and then it takes a few weeks to get it. You're going to have potentially a couple draws where that could come in. I'm going to talk about scoring and qualifying. So scoring and qualification. You have to, across all of the programs in this, you have to be working in a skilled job. Now, the presentation that I did on LMIAs, you can go reference that. I talk about what skilled work is and the NOC 0A or B level jobs. But you generally have to have experience in those jobs. If you're in a federal skilled worker, which is an overseas category, it's 1 year within the last 10. And if it's Canadian experience class, you need 1 year within the last 3. But the other thing that we look at when we're doing the ranking is we're looking at predominantly the age, your language ability, your work experience, and your education. There are other requirements under the different programs that you need to qualify. So you're going to need that work experience, because it's pretty hard to actually go through any of those programs without it, except if you're going through like a student screen, but we're not, those are generally found at the provincial level. But again, age, language, work experience, and education, those are the variables that you need to be mindful of. I'm going to get into qualifying here, and I'm just going to touch on some of the different areas with the slides here. So the optimal age, if you're applying an express entry, is between, actually that should say 20 to 29, and the number of points, if you're single, it'll be 110, and if you're married or you're applying with a spouse or a common law partner, it's 100. Okay, those are the maximum points, and I'll show you in a little bit. This stuff will actually go down depending on your age, from like 30 onwards. The older you get, the less points you lose. And at 45, that's when you're at 0. Okay, that's when you're done. So between 30 to 45, that's where, your chances significantly go down. And normally what we see is that it tends to be very difficult if you're after 35 years old. It tends to be pretty difficult for you to be able to, come as a direct immigrant. You're going to need some sort of, you need to be looking at being here in Canada at that time. So the older you get, the more challenging it becomes. And when you enter your mid-40s, it's quite hard to qualify unless you have a really good education. And generally, if you have skilled Canadian work experience, and generally at a 00, which is, a vice president of level type job. So that's where it becomes a little bit more challenging. Language. Now, I'm going to talk about IELTS. There's 2 tests that you can take. There's a CELPIP test and there's an IELTS test. Okay, if you're going to do a CELPIP test, no problem, but you're limited in terms of where you can get those tests. So they're not available everywhere. They have them in the UAE, they have them all across Canada, they have them in Korea, the Philippines. I believe they've rolled it out to India and China so far. So that's a Canadian test. It's done through the University of British Columbia. It's accepted by immigration. One of the things that people will ask is, which test should I take? And I'm like, I used to tell people the advantage of the CELPIP is that it's a very neutral type Canadian accent. When you start getting into the IELTS test, the listening section can be a little bit challenging depending on the accent of the person that you'll get, and if you're used to that or not. However, I've seen other people that I would have kind of thought that they would have done not so hot on it. They've done okay. But in terms of qualifying, what you need to do is you need to have generally IELTS 7s or better. Okay. Now you can qualify with an IELTS 6, but it becomes very difficult. So the way this works is, and I'm going to move the screen over again and just share that with you, is the language test equivalency charts. So these are available on the website. And in Canada, we have the equation system between the CELPIP and the IELTS is something called a CLB. So it's a Canadian language benchmark. And for you to get the points that you really need to remain competitive or be competitive, you really need to have a CLB 9. So a CLB 9 under a CELPIP general test, you can see it there, okay, is basically 9s right across the board. Okay, so that's pretty easy. So if you get a 9, you got to get 9 on reading, writing, listening, speaking. Now, if you go to an IELTS general test, a CLB 9 is right here. And for reading, writing, and speaking, it's a 7. And for listening, it's an 8. All right. So a CLB 9 across for CELPIP are 9s right across the board. And for a CLB 9 in an IELTS, it's 777 in everything except listening, which is an 8. Okay, you need that to get a CLB 9, and I'm going to explain why the CLB 9 is important to you. I'm going to do that after I finish up there. A lot of people will ask if I can study French and if they can do that, because if you have the 2 languages, yes, it does help. Now, if you're a native French speaker or you have French skills that are not just rudimentary, then yes, French is a great strategy and it opens up a number of different pathways for you if that's your second language, or conversely, if English is that for you. However, if you're like, I'm going to study some French and then I'm going to use it to immigrate, no, because you generally need to have a pretty good grasp of the language to be able to come here. Okay, so most people, if they have a good grasp of the language, they can study and they can generally hit what they need to hit. And if they are not hitting it, then you can get some help and try to do that. I will tell you this. Here's a tip, right? If you're from an English country, don't think that you're going to do well on the test because English is your native language. Okay, and I always use the example of driving a car. I've been driving for 30 years, but I haven't taken a driving test in 30 years. So, and I'm smiling actually because I have taken a driving test because I've lived in different countries, and my Korean driving test was actually quite funny, but ask me about that and I'll tell you. So if you're taking a driving test, you probably, if you've been driving for 30 years, you probably develop some bad habits. And the same thing with an English test. I get that you're an English speaker, but we're not studying your English ability. You're studying for the test at this point. You need to know how you're being marked and what little strategies you can do to up your English scores, because having that CLB 9 is so important, so important. Okay. You've heard me touch on this for a little bit. You need 1 year 1 year in 10 for an FSW, and you need 1 year in 3 for a Canadian experience class. Okay. It's best to have the 3 years of overseas work experience because that actually will up your CRS scores under that category. And I'm going to definitely show you what that looks like after I get through these slides. But you can also raise your scores with Canadian work experience. And this has been a strategy that we've seen become more and more important over the years, over the last couple of years specifically. And the reason is because that actually will give you more points and will be able to increase your scores. You receive points based on your education. It's a good way to offset the scores, okay? And we've seen a surge in student applications because you do get points for Canadian education and also having an additional credential. Also, the benefit too, and what people are seeing is that, and I always say this, like, you have to think about this holistic process of immigration. Okay. You must think about that. And you must think about it because there's, you have to plan to get here, and then you actually have to do it. And then you got to get settled in. And a lot of people think about just getting here and what that's going to look like. Being here as a student is awesome, right? Because, you get to kind of, settle in, and you get to, go and find some sort of job while you're going to school, or you might have internship possibilities, whatever. But it allows you to kind of soft land as opposed to like, whoompa, you're here, right? You're going to need at least a 3-year degree to qualify in express entry, because it gets very difficult. Now, it's not impossible, but it's pretty close to impossible. And I'll show you what the points are with that so that you can have a bit more of an understanding of that. Before I get into the strategy here, what I want to do is I want to go through those points again now that we've covered all of that with you. And I want to show you a little bit about what those look like too. So the CRS, or the Comprehensive Ranking System for Express Entry, remember we talked about the age, the education, the language, the work experience here. So let's just chat about that for a minute. So again, if you're applying and you're between 20 and 29, you're going to max out at 110. And if you scroll down on this page here, you can see there's your points. You can see that 18 years of age, 90, 95, 100, 110. But see this, after that, you're losing roughly about 5 points, 5 points a year. Okay, it's going to continue to drop. All right, until you get up to age 45, and then you're down at 0. So that's why, again, a lot of times when people will come to me, I never push anybody into coming and immigrating. But if people want to do that, I'm certainly going to help them out, because that's what I do. However, I always do tell people that I don't want to give them the hard sell and say, you got to do it now, you got to do it now. But in reality, you got to do it. If you're in the age bracket and you're kind of marginal, you should take the opportunity. And the reason is because sometimes people will come back to me later on and they'll be like, oh, we're ready now. And I'm like, you don't qualify now. You've lost, it's been 2 years. You've lost 10 points, that 10 points, and the draws have gone up. So that's pretty heartbreaking sometimes with people, because then they were qualified and then they're not. Now, you can see your maximum level of education is 150 if you're single, or 140. Now, if you have, say, a BA, a bachelor's degree, 3 years, you're going to be at 120. So again, if you're at a PhD level, you're up a little bit higher. But if you're at like a bachelor's, a 3-year degree, 3 years or more, three to four, you're going to be at 120. And if you're applying with a partner, it's going to be about 112. And then we've got the language proficiency. So 160 is like CLB 10s, right? CLB 9s would be 124s right across the board. And if you're applying with a spouse, it's 116. Now, the minimum level to apply is a CLB 7 or a CLB 7. And a CLB 7 is IELTS 6s, and people will come with those scores. But again, having those scores, your points are really low. And, just having CLB 7s right across the board, that's 68 for CLB 7s right across reading, writing, listening, speaking. And if you're applying as a couple and you're the principal applicant, it's going to be 64 right across. So that's not really enough, to remain competitive. Points for work experience. So if you've worked for 5 years in Canada, you have 80 points. Okay. I'm not going to get into the spousal. I'm just kind of being mindful of the time here. You guys can review this. So then you get into the skill transferability. So we look at education and we look at work experience. Now this is where the points actually become important, having the CLB 9. So having a CLB 9 with, say two degrees or a degree and a diploma, for instance, you're at 50 points. And then if you have Canadian work experience, you can tack on more points there. Foreign work experience, same thing. You can have if you have 3 years, that helps out a lot too. Okay. So let's move into the strategy a little bit, because I don't want to bore you with stuff that you can read on the website there. I want to get into this because this is what's really important. And these are things that aren't covered on the website. So more education or Canadian education. So if you're in your country there and you have a BA and you have the ability to take, say, a 1-year postgrad, and it will come back as a 1 year, you can do that. A lot of people will use the Canadian education. They'll come here as a student. They'll get, say, a 1-year diploma to match up with their BA. And then what happens is that they can also use that because they have extra points for Canadian education. So if you take something that's 1 or 2 years, you're going to get 15 extra points. If you take something that's 3 years plus, you're going to get 30 points. All right. Canadian work experience, because this is when you can use your postgraduate diploma. Now, if you come here, and again, this is something that I'm going to talk about in a future session, and I've already talked about last week a little bit, is your postgrad. If you go to a school that's a designated learning institution, which means, and it qualifies for a postgrad work permit. Now, you have to go to a DLI or a designated learning institution, but if you get a postgrad work permit, then you can work in a skilled job and you can get an extra, 35, 40, up to 80 points if you're working for 5 years. Again, the maximum you can get under a postgrad is 3 years. However, if it's a job where there's, say, an LMIA, that might be a strategy. That allows you to gain more points while you're losing less points for age. So you see how the strategy comes in a little bit. You have to really look at the whole scenario, and you have to have all your different backups. That's why having a plan, this is how people are successful. So Canadian work experience, another thing, another way to increase your points. Applying without a spouse. So you can actually lodge an application, have your spouse as non-accompanying, and you'll probably, depending on how, I don't want to say how weak your spouse is, but they might be dragging your points down. So you can have them as non-accompanying. You would be scored on the single category, and you could possibly have more points. Again, that's a really good strategy, but you have to be careful with that because there's a number of different factors that you have to take into account. Labor market impact assessments. A lot of people think that this is the magic bullet. And if you were with us last week, you would know that that's not the case, because you have to be very careful. What type of LMIAs? Not all LMIAs are the same. So you need to take that into account when you're looking at that. You need to have a plan, and you need to know, can you actually get one? Now, we're in different times right now with LMIAs. It remains to be seen what that's going to look like. I'm going to start wrapping up here in a bit, but I'm going to do a few things. So getting back to the points, one of the things that I want to do, or I want to make you aware of, since you're here and taking the time to listen to me, is that if you want to look at where you sit, you can take a complimentary assessment with us at our website. So it's maple-immigration.ca, an online assessment. Now, this is free. This doesn't cost you anything. The reason is because we've been in business for 10 years. And right from the beginning, one of the things that I've been very, very deliberate about is that we don't work with anybody who doesn't have a good chance of getting through. Now, again, ethically and through the regulatory body, we're not allowed to guarantee results or anything like that. However, when people are paying us money and they're expecting something in return, we have to make sure that at the very least that they can, reasonably get there. So what we do is that you can fill out that. You can go to that Maple Immigration online assessment there. And what you can do is that you can fill that in, and we can look at that very quickly and see if this actually is an option for you. Okay, so that's very important to know. The last thing, and this is something that I always finish up with, because I think it just hits the nail right to the head. So you always, if you want to be successful with your immigration, you must think very strategically. You have to have a plan from the beginning, and this is where the success is going to come from. Plain and simple. And again, you heard me start the presentation with this, and you're going to hear me end it with it, because you have to have a plan. You have to make sure that you're able to execute on that plan. everyone's different. And again, the people that I see that are successful are the ones that are planning ahead. And that's it. You got to have a realistic plan to be able to push it ahead. Thank you very much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. And if you have any questions, just feel free to reach out to us. Again, there's a complimentary assessment there. You can go in there. It doesn't cost you anything. We'll just take a look at your profile, and we can let you know if there's an opportunity for you under that. Again, it doesn't take as much time just to look at the basic information and go from there. Listen, thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and I hope everybody's staying safe. And we'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you for watching my video. Hopefully you enjoyed this masterclass. Please subscribe to my channel for more updates. We'll see you in the next video.